It's Dwyer. It is July 14th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Folks, you don't get opportunities like this that often, right? A superior talent, a guy who, quite frankly, has few peers, on the cheap because of a fight against Carlos Adames, who was a bad matchup for him, right? Understand, Adames has foot speed, more foot speed than Edgar Berlanga has, right? Adames, like Joe Frazier, has an upper body that he can move and bend. Right, folks? You don't get Adames's motor, right? A guy who's active, who's going to continually come after you, who has stamina, who's going to be there, who's going to close strong, who's not discouraged by a bad start to a fight, right? You're not going to get that drive with that upper body flexibility and that foot speed that often, right? More times than not, you're going to get an Edgar Berlanga with a big right hand, a big left hook, who needs to be close to you, right? So I need for folks to understand, as ridiculous as this sounds, and I encourage people to look at the comments to, past videos I've made on Hamza Shiraz. I need for folks to understand that Hamza Shiraz is a superior talent. Occasionally you are looking at some guy, right, and you understand the public has no idea, right? Montana, Jerry Rice, and what makes it striking with Sheeraz, who, by the way, is as tall as Larry Holmes was, right? Holmes, of course, was a dominant heavyweight champ, one of the dominant heavyweight champs in history. Sheeraz started off at 154. Right? Understand too, Sheeraz is not the towering inferno Sebastian Fundora, where you look at Fundora and you understand Fundora is an offensive pacing guy. No, this is the guy with more foundational skills, not a pacing that throws opponents off. So Sheeraz actually has more upside than Sebastian Fundora. So there are many people in the public who, will see a fight like Sheeraz against Carlos Adames, and I'm talking about one of the champs at 160 pounds. And they will then reach the conclusion that Sheeraz, who, I'll put it this way, is one of the biggest talents in boxing, that Sheeraz isn't special, right? They'll think that an Edgar Berlanga is simply too big for him. Understand, this was Sheeraz's first fight at 168, and it took place on the road in New York City, right? Folks, this is the kind of horse you back. He is going to have a nemesis, not Canelo. I think he wins that fight. His nemesis is going to be Diego Pacheco, right? Let me also say this too. I'm expecting him to have not much more, since he is 6'3 plus, not much more than a cup of coffee at 168, because you have a special situation right now that all of us need to be paying attention to at 175. Right? The public has caught on to the fact that Dmitry Bivol is one of the best boxers in the sport. Right? Understand, Bivol is defense first. He's back foot first, but yet he's a combination puncher. Right? Um, of course, you have Arthur Beterbiev. Folks, Beterbiev not only has only lost once, but just understand that only one guy in Beterbiev's pro career has gone the distance against him. Right? And I would argue that he, more than anyone else, has the most credibility at 175 because he's already beaten Callum Smith. He's already beaten Anthony Yard. Right? And of course, you have the open question at 175. A guy who I think, because he's unorthodox, now this is going to be different than Hamza Shiraz, but because David Benavidez is unorthodox, right? Because he fights you in a way you don't expect, right? His feet are almost parallel. He's changing gears, right? We're not quite sure what to expect from David Benavidez. Let me say this. He beat David Morrell. We all thought that was a great fight. You want to reconsider that fight. Questions have emerged because of Morrell's, we'll put it in quotes, win, really a loss, to Chatiev this last weekend. Right? How good is David Morrell really? Folks, we don't have the answer to that question. Understand, too, you have Joshua Buatsi at 175, right? Buddy McGirt, Callum Smith's trainer, before the last round of Smith's fight against Buatsi, which Smith won, right? Smith legitimately wins that fight. But just to understand the challenge Buatsi poses, Buddy McGirt's pleading with his fighter for one more round. McGirt, who presumably knows Callum Smith, they've been together for a while, right, understood that Buatsi was such a strenuous task that he thought his fighter was spent going into the 12th round. And truth be told, Callum Smith, that 12th round is one of Smith's best as a pro. Right? Smith is that soldier who is always ready for that last round. Well, let me just say, into the mix is a superior talent. Right? There are many questions. There are many questions about what happens if Sheeraz figures things out. Folks, there's a lot for him to figure out. I know he's with Andy Lee, who used to train with Emmanuel Stewart. For the record, I've told a story about how Julio Cesar Chavez was in a fight in the state of Texas, a loose state, used to be loose. In other words, if you had a pulse, you were allowed to fight in Texas. Certain states have a laissez-faire culture. As of a few years ago, the state of Texas was not going to test you. We now have VADA. The sport's evolving. But understand, years ago, there was a drug testing clause in a contract. Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. was a big-time fighter at the time. He runs into Andy Lee. Understand who Andy Lee was. Now, we know the Kronk Gym was a gym where you could have the biggest punch in the world. You could be Vladimir Klitschko. You could be Lennox Lewis. And Emmanuel Stewart was a guy who believed that your top punch had to be your jab. Right? So, both Lewis and Klitschko would pepper you with the jab. Then when you fell asleep, when you switched off, when you started focusing on avoiding the jab, that's when the guy would come in with the big right hand. Well, understand, in my opinion, having lived through the era, Andy Lee wasn't following that playbook. Andy Lee was what I call rough and tumble. So Andy Lee comes out in Texas against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. in Chavez Jr.'s prime, not at a catch weight like Chavez Jr. fought Canelo years later. And he starts roughing up Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. But then Chavez Jr. had a lot of things going on, right? Suddenly seemed to hit another gear, which was shocking. So, of course, he goes into the bathroom. There's a drug test that's to be taken. It's a urine test after the fight. Chavez Jr. goes in the bathroom in Texas with one or two other people and then comes out with a urine sample. Evander Holyfield was livid. Emmanuel Stewart was livid. Right? The fighter he fought was Andy Lee. Right? Just understand, Andy Lee, for some, is an uncrowned champion. It clearly looked like there was something weird, that Chavez Jr. had unnatural strength in that fight. I don't know for sure. Let's just say the urine test wasn't done properly. You can't have multiple people go in the bathroom. Well, Hamza Shiraz has switched over to Andy Lee as his trainer. Andy Lee, for those who don't know, is one of the best trainers in boxing. Right? Now, just understand, you saw in this Edgar Berlanga fight that Sheeraz is still figuring out how to use his tools because he fought the wrong fight. Right? Let's just say that I picked Sheeraz to win this fight, and then I was horrified. I mean, literally, I was horrified by how Sheeraz went about it. Right? He needs to figure out things with his trainer. Now, let me say, I was happy that Jim Lampley did the telecast. Jim threw out some things that may have sounded a little bit off, but were actually key insights. Right? He talked about Sheeraz's big feet. Folks, understand, this is a guy who's bigger than Benavidez. Right? This is a guy who, as I said earlier, he might be taller than Larry Holmes. And right now, he's fighting at 168. Also, Lampley pointed out Sheeraz's punch selection. Now, this comes with a downside. Right? But Sheeraz is fluid in terms of being able to, at 6'3", dip a shoulder and throw uppercuts at a slugger who dares to come close to him in the pocket. He also is very adept at, throwing hooks. He can hook off his jab. He's pinpoint with right hooks, even when he hasn't thrown his right hand. Right? And he's fluid. You can tell he can put combinations together. But let's talk about what he did and what he shouldn't have done. Right? Berlanga, fourth round, starts to close the distance on him. You understand, Berlanga is not Carlos Adames in terms of flexibility, upper body, in terms of fast feet with a rhythm. Right? In other words, Adames sees an opening, he can scoot over to that opening. He can get inside underneath you, and then he's ready to throw punches. Right? Edgar Berlanga is slower moving. Now, I'll put it to you this way. Hamza Shiraz, and I'm going to disagree with Jim Lampley on this. On the telecast, Jim Lampley is talking about Sheeraz's right hand. He's not sold on Sheeraz's jab. Of course, Sheeraz isn't showcasing his jab. Let me put this diplomatically. In my opinion, Sheeraz has one of the great jabs in the sport. Right, folks? Now, I'll concede it's not a mobile jab. But this isn't a jab that stings. Right? This isn't a float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. He's not stinging you like a bee. Folks, this is a power jab. Right? I'm going to name 3 guys right now with power jabs in boxing. Understand, with a power jab, you don't have to throw anything else. If you marry a power jab to the ability to hook off that jab, to a straight punch with your other hand, a straight right, fighters like Berlanga should never be able to get close to you in the pocket. Right? There's a video online. Please find it. It's one of the heaviest punchers of the 1970s, Earnie Shavers, a guy who knocked down Larry Holmes. Right? It's one of the closest moments Holmes came to losing his title. Right? Just understand, Earnie Shavers fought both Holmes and Ali. Shavers, in the YouTube video, basically tells you that Ali's jab stung. Right? Ali would, get you a little bit off balance with that jab. The difference was Larry Holmes' jab hurt. Right? Larry Holmes could bust you up with the jab. Today, 3 power jabs in the sport. Vergil Ortiz. Right? And let me just say as an aside, I have no idea what the Boots Ennis crowd is doing calling out Vergil Ortiz. Right now, I thought Ortiz lost to Boachuk. I believe Ortiz's corner, and I know Robert Garcia and company have to play the party line. They want to boost their fighter. You don't get far in the sport as a trainer if you're going around telling the press what we all saw, that your fighter lost a fight given to him. Right? But I believe his corner knows Ortiz lost that fight. But let's not get confused. Ortiz might be the best at 154, a division in which, let's be real here, everyone is avoiding Keith Thurman. Right? Another great jab, and he's about to have a fight. And you need to watch this fight closely. The question is, can the guy carry the weight? If he can, I think Lawrence Okolie, who I've criticized in the past, I think Lawrence Okolie has a real chance of becoming the king in the heavyweight division. Look, I know Moses Atama is impressive and stuff like that. Folks, Okolie, 6'5", with a jab where he doesn't have to throw anything else, is one of these fighters who the public doesn't like, but who already has had titles in 2 different weight classes. Now he's in the heavyweight division, and he's fighting Kevin Lorena, a guy who knocked down Daniel Dubois multiple times. This is one of the most important heavyweight fights this year. Right? Understand, too, Lorena fought Justice Hune and gave him all kinds of problems late in that fight. Right? I know Lorena's knockout percentage is sub 50. Right, folks? It's clear that he's a problem. Right? If Okolie looks good, against Lorena. Okole's a guy who I might have to take over Daniel Dubois if Dubois beats Alexander Usyk. And let me just say, added to those names of great jabs, power jabs, is Hamza Shiraz. You know, Sheeraz was stunning in this fight because he could have won this fight easily by just throwing that jab and not much of anything else. Right? His focus should have been on spacing the entire fight. Right? With this jab, he should have let Berlanga know, player, you're not getting inside. Player, I don't think you have the countering skills to time my jab to get around it. Keep in mind, too, Sheeraz has other punches. He has an effective right hand. He can throw an uppercut if a guy slips in, as Buster Douglas did to Mike Tyson. Douglas, pretty good jab. Right? Just understand, these jabbers can bludgeon you, make you desperate. The blueprint fight that Hamza Shiraz should be focused on, in addition to listening to Andy Lee, I'm sure Andy Lee's telling him what Emmanuel Stewart told Lee, advice Lee often disregarded, is to set up shop with the jab. Sweep the early rounds. Let the game come to you. The blueprint fight, and it's a blueprint, is Larry Holmes against a guy with an A+ level left hook. Right? There are very few of them, right? Joe Frazier had an A+ level left hook, in my opinion. Jerry Cooney. Understand, Cooney only loses 3 times. It's the 3 Hall of Famers. Right? At the time of the Holmes fight, he's unbeaten. He then lost to, and it was a different fight style, different set of skills, Michael Spinks, who was a great fighter. Please don't judge Spinks by that Mike Tyson fight. And of course, the last guy he lost to was George Foreman, right, in a shootout. That's a shootout fight. Well, understand, Larry Holmes is fighting Jerry Cooney, and Holmes just throws the jab. Occasionally, you have to throw a right hand, right? But Holmes never stops pumping the jab to the point where Cooney's so beaten, and a guy with Hamza Shiraz's skill set needs to aim for this goal. Cooney's so beaten that he just falls down. You know, Holmes lands some punches, but it's not like he's landing Shakur Stevenson crisp shots, right? It's more Jerry Cooney has spent most of the fight trying to get by Holmes's jab, is getting popped with Holmes's jab repeatedly, right? Gets in some shots of his own, but not as many as he needed, and just couldn't continue. Understand, not only does Cooney fall down, Cooney's trainer, Victor Valley, hops in the ring to stop the fight. The Cooney corner knew their fighter was beaten. That's what Sheeraz needs to do. Now the problem is Sheeraz has too much of Josh Taylor in him. Right? This is a little bit of a British approach to boxing problem. Right? So, he's in New York. He is Edgar Berlanga. Berlanga starts to get, ornery. Starts to move closer in the pocket. Right? So, Sheeraz, of course, then starts throwing hooks. How's that possible? Right? I'm hoping Larry Holmes sees this video and picks up the phone and calls Hamza Shiraz and gives him a Hall of Fame perspective on why that wasn't the right strategy. Why is he throwing hooks? Why is he closing the distance himself against Edgar Berlanga? What's the goal in that? Why even go for the knockout? Sheeraz shouldn't even go for the knockout, and he's a puncher. He's a puncher. Let me just say, too, earlier in the afternoon, the Katea fight, you had Sergio Mora, who's spectacular. And Mora was talking about how muscle-bound guys often aren't the hardest punchers. That muscle-bound guys often don't have the most stamina. You look at Sheeraz, Sheeraz should never bulk up. The balance is right here. He has stamina and he has power. The fact that he looks like he doesn't lift weights probably helps him even more, because guys like Berlanga think if they get inside, they can rough him up. Right? But my point to you is, Sheeraz has ring coverage Berlanga doesn't have. Sheeraz has one of the sport's best jabs. Berlanga should never get as close as he gets before Sheeraz knocks him down multiple times. Right? So let me just say, Sheeraz needs to figure out how to never put himself at risk. Now, I know Thomas Hearns threw a lot of hooks in some fights. Right? The Duran fight. Hearns is outside. Hearns is hitting him with the jab. Hearns is hitting him with the straight right. Then, of course, he senses that he's hurt Duran, which he did. So Hearns then moves in, and Hearns, who's feinting a lot, comes in and is throwing a lot of hooks and withers Duran. Folks, you're risking the whole thing on the sequence. Right? Hearns got the second round KO. Duran never gets the car out of the driveway. Right? It's a dramatic knockout. Just like Sheeraz here against Berlanga gets the fifth round KO. Berlanga is finished. Ref gives Berlanga an opportunity. Berlanga gets knocked down multiple times. Can't right the ship. Okay, great. But understand what could have happened if Hearns thought to himself, okay, Duran's too hurt. I'm going to come in with hooks now while he's recovering. Right? Had Duran woken up, had Duran with Hearns closing in, suddenly gotten a second wind, Hearns would have been close to a guy called Stonehands, Manos de Piedras. Right? He would have been close to a guy who, would know how to go to a guy's body. Right? These tall, thin guys don't have a lot of meat on the bones, on their bodies. So understand, if you have one of boxing's best jabs, if you have a straight right hand, right? Why are you closing the distance on a slugger like Edgar Berlanga? Against Canelo, you want to fight where you never have to close the distance on Canelo. Right? Canelo's advanced. He does things to get inside. Right? I want people to look at the second Golovkin fight. Understand, in the first fight, Canelo's on his back foot for a stretch of it. Right? If you don't think Canelo has a back foot, you're kidding yourself. In the second fight, Canelo's doing things. These are kind of, we'll call them David Hay moves, where Canelo is throwing huge punches that Golovkin has to back away from. Then as Golovkin backs away, Canelo's running in behind it. Right? My point to you is, you need to slow down that fight if you're Hamza Shiraz. You have the height, 6'3", at 168. You have the ring coverage on one of boxing's best jabs. You have a very good right hand behind it when you need it. Because you're inverted, as Cooney was, by the way, your movement's a little bit odd. That's an advantage because that's going to throw off what Canelo's doing, Canelo's timing, right? In a best case, and I know Turkey's talking about putting Sheeraz in with Canelo. In a best case, Hamza Shiraz can win that fight without a shootout. Canelo doesn't move that well. By the way, I think that's what Crawford's going to try to key on. As I've said here before, I expect Crawford to fight the same fight he fought against Victor Postol. Canelo doesn't move that well. Right? My point to you is that's an opening for Hamza Shiraz's jab. Right? If Canelo tries to duck under the jab, that's an opening for Shiraz to then throw left hooks. Right? While staying outside. But what Shiraz should do against Canelo is stay outside. He should never allow Canelo to get inside to hit him in the body. Right? Think Mike Tyson. How did Buster Douglas cut down that tree? Wasn't it with jabs? Wasn't it with an uppercut when Tyson slipped the jab? Right? Douglas would have been a fool if he would have invited Tyson into the pocket and had a shootout with him. It looked to me that that's what Sheeraz was aiming for against Berlanga. Now, we just had a fighter with ring coverage, with absurd accuracy. After a fight, tell a reporter that he just wanted people to see the dog in him. Right? Shakur Stevenson. You and I understand it's a great Stevenson fight. When Stevenson is able to extend his arms, throw that pinpoint straight left, hit you, use hand speed in the middle of the ring. Right? Because Stevenson's too fast for most. Not William Zepeda. Zepeda's kind of like Carlos Adames. Right? A motor that's nonstop. You know, an ability to kind of come in a little bit low and be inside and throw volume. Right? But against most guys, Stevenson against a stiff guy, you don't want Stevenson trying to be a dog. You need to tell Stevenson, look, what do you want to do? In fact, you need to tell Sheeraz this. Do you want to be a dog? Or do you want to win this fight comfortably? Right? He needs to leverage this jab. The Lawrence Okolie fight's interesting because Okolie, his first fight at heavyweight, he stopped the guy in the first round. Right? Understand, to win the Bridgerweight title, I believe he wins that fight in the first or second round. Okolie has a big right hand that he throws behind the jab. But understand, and I know the fans hate this, but the world's different now because Okolie's at heavy, where he's not viewed as a Goliath. Okolie's one of boxing's best clinchers. Right? If I'm Okolie, I don't even want to throw the big right hand until we're halfway through the fight and the opponent, like most guys who used to fight these Kronk gym guys, has forgotten the right hand's there. The opponent's dealing with a sledgehammer power jab, and then when the opponent starts slipping it, a Lawrence Okolie can clinch. Right? I believe that's the skill set. The Larry Holmes, Lawrence Okolie clinching skill set. Sheeraz needs to work on. He needs to put the I'm a dog mindset off at the side. You know, Josh Taylor would have had a lot more success if, when he's fighting a Teofimo Lopez, a guy who has a problem with southpaws. So much so that Jermaine Ortiz goes southpaw. He's not even a southpaw. He goes southpaw when he fights Teofimo Lopez because he saw the problem Sandor Martin posed to Teofimo Lopez. Here you have Josh Taylor, who can be a slick southpaw, who has a back foot. But Josh Taylor had too much dog in him. Folks, that's a bad thing. Josh Taylor keeps crashing the pocket on Teofimo Lopez, who wants you in the pocket. I hope Andy Lee is able to convince Hamza Shiraz, player, we don't need to be in the pocket. Here are videos of Larry Holmes. Right? Be outside. Bludgeon the guy. Make him have to come to you. Then you can, empty the toolkit on him. Because he'll be the one who needs the rounds. Right? I thought against Edgar Berlanga, and don't get me wrong, knockouts cause amnesia. Sheeraz looks spectacular, is never tested in the match. Folks, that's who he is. This is a guy who won the 2021 UK Boxers Writers Club Young Fighter of the Year award. Right? People in the game know who this guy is. Right? He's never tested by Edgar Berlanga. But just understand, when you see Berlanga bounce in the pocket, that's his one chance to win the fight. Right? He gets in the pocket. You understand he has a big right. You understand he has a left hook. What is Berlanga doing against a 6'3" fighter being allowed to get in the pocket? What's that about? Right? Let's hope Sheeraz doesn't fight Canelo with the mindset of, I'm going to finish this guy. I'm going to get him in the pocket, and then I'm going to turn off the lights. No, he needs to have the Bivol mindset. Right? Bivol, even though the judges did not give Bivol the early rounds, Bivol had early success. Then he starts to pull away in that fight. Right? Even as he pulls away, Bivol understood, I'm not going to be in the pocket trying to overpower Saul Alvarez. Right? I'm going to let the game come to me. I'm going to take what's given. This guy can't handle my fluidity. He can't handle my jab. Bivol has a mobile jab. Right? He doesn't have my hand speed. I'm going to throw enough bursts to let the judges know, hey, you should give me the round. I'm going to back away. I'm not going to let this guy dictate the terms of this fight. Right? Let's just say Sheeraz is the young guy who, if he figures it out, could beat Canelo, could pivot to 175. Let me let the world in on a secret. The British want world titles, but they're absolutely obsessed with domestic victories. Right? The fights that matter the most to the British, whatever else is happening in the world, is Nigel Benn against Chris Eubank. It's George Groves against Carl Froch. It's Derek Chisora against David Haye. It's Derek Chisora against Dillian White. Right? The British love a domestic civil war. It's part of the national psyche. Just think about the dollars involved. If Hamza Shiraz beats Canelo, folks, he's 6'3". He was underfed at 160 and 154. If he pivots then to 175, right, just think of all the names. Right? Lyndon Arthur, Anthony Yard, who has an interesting fight coming up against David Benavidez. right? Joshua Buatsi, Callum Smith, right? Then, of course, you have what's going on in the rest of the world. Beterbiev, Bivol, right, folks? The paydays are just going to be falling from the sky, right? The venues are going to be places like O2 or Wembley, and it's going to be packed, right? Sheeraz needs to figure out, look, I don't want to be big man on campus here in the pocket against Edgar Berlanga. I can beat this guy from distance. Let me use this fight to hone my skills on beating a guy from distance. I don't want to throw the jab so infrequently that the great boxing commentator Jim Lampley is talking about his right hand, right? Imagine a Larry Holmes fight where you're watching it and you're several rounds in and Jim Lampley is saying, oh yeah, Larry's jab's not the focal point of his attack, it's this other hand. Come on, it's like, what? What? Folks, just listen to Lampley's commentary. That'll tell you how neglected Hamza Shiraz's jab was in this match. Folks, just understand, in my eyes, Shiraz's jab is his calling card. Shiraz's jab is his competitive advantage against Canelo. Right? Shiraz's jab is so good, he doesn't have to throw anything else. He doesn't have to let an Edgar Berlanga deep in the pocket. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. If I'm Andy Lee, I say to Sheeraz, hey, player, throw the jab more. I say, hey, you know where Berlanga's dangerous? When he's close to you. Right? In a future fight, let's try to keep guys like this on the outside. Right? It's different if you don't have a choice. If you're fighting a William Zepeda and he's just high motor, fight style where he's using volume as a weapon and he's going to come in regardless of what you do. Right? But those fighters are few and far between. Right? This fight wasn't against Carlos Adames. Right? Sheeraz shouldn't have fought it like it was. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Let me say this too. If he fights Benavidez, right, folks, that jab is going to be a necessity. He's going to have to keep David outside. Right? Whatever his punching power, he can't have the mindset of trading hooks with David Benavidez. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.